This is Tony Blazer for the Motocross Vault presented by Blinzall. If you're in the market for some high quality racing oil for your two-stroke or four, make sure you go to blinzall.com and use our discount code VAULT20 to save 20% at checkout. Thank you for all the support.
Hey, this is David Iser from DMXS Radio, and you are about to get roosted in the Motocross Vault.
Hello and welcome back to the Motocross Vault. My name is Tony Blazer, and what this video is going to cover is a look back at the 1993 Yamaha YZ125. This is the first year for a redesign on the YZ125. The 80, the 250, and the 125 are all new here in 93. Big change. I have actually ridden this bike quite a bit. A good buddy of mine had one, and I remember thinking just how unbelievably slow it was at the time. Back then I had my 1990 CR 125, and my CR, in spite of being several years older, was way faster than this bike. But the Yamaha had way better suspension. It had very good handling too. It didn't have the head shake my Honda had. I liked the bike for everything except the motor. I remember it just felt like it made lots of noise and went nowhere. You just hold it wide open and just, and just never, there was no hit, no sudden burst like you'd want, 125 to have. It was a all new bike, like I said, this year in every way but the motor. The motor this year was basically a carryover of a modified 92, and the 92 was a pretty slow machine. That motor, I guess at that point was 6-7 years old. It came out in 86, and over time it had kind of just gotten slower and slower. Unfortunately, I think the 86 was actually probably faster than the 92. I had an 89. It was pretty spunky when it was new. By the time I got rid of it, it was totally worn out. But when I first got it, it was pretty quick. And this 93 was, I think, slower than my 89. It just didn't run very well, these YZs, early on. In 94, they finally came out with a new motor, and by 96, most people would say the YZ was probably the best bike. But this 93 was, as I said, all new this year. Good-looking motorcycle in terms of styling. Jeff Emig was running the #1 plate this year, or certainly very fast on it. I think these YZs could be fast with a lot of work, but they required a fair amount of aftermarket help there to get there. And in stock condition, it was just a little underwhelming. If you like this sort of thing, you can check out many other videos I've done. I've done all kinds of coverage of different motorcycles, different brands, off-road, motocross, even ATV stuff. So definitely check that out if you're interested in some other motocross style content. If you'd like to support what I do, I just came out with some all-new merch. I just came out with an all-new design based on the Yamaha PW50, a very iconic machine, the old Yzinger. I based it on a 1997 Yzinger. Had some people ask me to do something like this, and I really, I never got to ride one of these. My parents were not into motorcycles, so I never had a Mini or anything, or a Pee-wee bike. But they're definitely one of the most popular machines ever built. It's amazing. It really hasn't changed in 40 years and still a great beginner machine. Yamaha really nailed it here with this first generation. So I have, obviously, this new PW50 design. I have all kinds of different designs based on all the different manufacturers as well. So if you'd like to pick up something and support what I do, check out my Motocross Vault store on Teespring, and I'll put a card in the description and a little link here in the video as well. So here, without further ado, is a look back at the all-new for 1993 Yamaha YZ125. It is no secret that Yamaha's YZ125 endured a tough run in the late 80s and early 90s. During this era, the tuning fork tiddlers were repeatedly outclassed by their rivals. A new motor revived hopes in 1986, but cranky shifting and a narrow power band held it back from claiming the top spot in the standings. Chassis updates and suspension upgrades continued to refine the YZ package throughout the rest of the decade, but its one-dimensional motor remained a handicap on an otherwise solid racer. By 1992, this handicap had become an albatross around the YZ's neck. The stock bike was slow to the point of being painful and no longer competitive in anything above the novice class. It handled well and was suspended decently, but it lacked the thrust to keep up with a well-running Mini. In stock condition, it was slow to rev, hard to keep on the pipe, and basically an absolute disaster. For 1993, Yamaha looked to put those bad memories in the rearview mirror with an all-new YZ125. The 1993 bike featured a totally new frame, redesigned bodywork, and a major revision to the suspension. Unfortunately, the only thing they did not really change was the motor. By this point, the YZ's 124cc case-reed motor was very clearly past its prime, but with an all-new YZ80 and YZ250 also on tap for 1993, there was just not enough money in the R&D budget to redesign the motor for 93. Even though the basic motor design remained largely the same, Yamaha did make several changes aimed at upgrading the YZ's anemic performance. First up was a new cylinder, which repositioned the Yamaha power valve system drum closer to the exhaust port for better sealing. The new cylinder also featured revised porting and a new combustion chamber for better flow and a cleaner burn. A new quote-unquote low boy pipe was bolted on that featured better scavenging and a lower center of gravity to improve handling. In addition to offering better weight distribution, the new lower pipe also moved the hot exhaust away from the airbox to aid in keeping the air entering the motor cooler for improved performance. The airbox was also enlarged for 1993 and featured a new intake that drew air directly from a vent placed at the rear of the seat. This, combined with the cooler charge provided by the repositioned exhaust, was supposed to provide better throttle response for 93. The intake remained a case reed, and the carburation was handled by a 35mm flat-slide McCuney TM mixer. In the bottom end, Yamaha added an additional plate for the clutch to improve durability, and a new coating to the shift forks to hopefully smooth out the YZ's infamously poor shifting action. Last up in the power department were new radiators that increased capacity by 15% to handle what Yamaha hoped would be an increase in power for 93. While the motor changes for 93 were not earth-shattering, they did add up to a slightly better power package than the year before. The new motor offered a broader pull than 1992 and a little more power throughout the power band. There was not a lot of torque off the bottom, but the new bike did pick up better than 1992. As with every YZ125 since '86, it did its best work in the mid-range, but even there, it was not particularly impressive. Once past the mid-range, it flattened out quickly and preferred to be shifted rather than wrung out. If you tried to keep it pinned, it tapered off less drastically than previous Yamahas, but screaming it was still not the best way to make the use of its power. To make time on the YZ, it was best to shift right past the torque peak in the mid-range and not allow it to fall off the pipe. If you could keep it in its narrow sweet spot, it was not a total disaster, but keeping it there required a great deal of skill. Overall, the new bike was easier to ride and slightly faster than 1992, but it was still quite a bit slower than any of its 125 rivals. On the chassis front, the new Yamaha was more successful. The redesigned frame maintained the overall geometry of 1992, but offered a claimed 50% increase in rigidity, better ground clearance, and a fully removable subframe for the first time. New bodywork was also slimmer through the middle and flatter on top to make moving forward easier than ever before. On the track, the new chassis offered an excellent combination of turning and stability. It was not as sharp as the twitchy RM and CR, but far more nimble than the freight train-like KX. It offered a solid, middle-of-the-road package that did everything well, but nothing spectacularly. It was not going to dive underneath a Honda, but neither was it going to pitch you off unexpectedly on that fourth gear straight like the RM. It was solid, predictable, and confidence-inspiring. Some of the credit for the YZ's excellent handling certainly was due to its new suspension. For 1993, Yamaha redesigned the internals on their 43mm inverted Kiaba units to allow increased oil flow to provide better cooling. The cartridge rod diameter was increased from 20mm to 25mm, and new low-friction bushings were added to fight stiction. In addition to the new valving, the spring rates were also bumped up slightly to provide a more balanced ride for 93. Out back, an all-new Kiaba shock was paired with a redesigned Motocross linkage and a new Delta Box swing arm. The new linkage offered a revised curve and slightly more compact layout that did away with the low-hanging linkage of 1992. The new damper featured a 2mm larger shock shaft, increased oil capacity, revised damping, and a new set of seals to improve performance. Travel remained unchanged at 12.8 inches, and the shock offered adjustments for both compression and rebound damping. On the track, both ends of the YZ were improved for 1993. The forks in particular were excellent, taking big hits and small with equal aplomb. It was sprung well for fast riders and stayed plush even on hard hits. They were not quite as buttery smooth as the ones found on the Kawasaki, but they were much better than the Showa units found on the Honda and Suzuki. In the rear, the YZ's damper was equally improved for 1993. The new frame, linkage, and swing arm contributed to a 38% increase in torsional rigidity over 1992, and the bike offered a much more solid feel in the rough. The shock was sprung somewhat stiffly for slower or lighter pilots, but it was perfect for aggressive riders. It absorbed anything short of a supercross track in stride and could be charged into whoops and large obstacles without fear of the bike kicking or doing anything weird. Again, it was not as ultra plush as the Kawasaki, but it was better than the RM and way better than the CR. In the details department, the Yamaha was also much improved over 1992. The new plastic did away with the weirdly bulging right side panel of 91-92 and replaced it with a far sleeker profile. The new seat was also flatter and taller, which made it easier to move forward for turns. While most people thought the ergonomics were improved, some shorter riders did not care for the new taller seat. Overall, the new plastic was well received, but care had to be taken to prevent boots from snagging on the radiator wings and pulling them out of their mounting holes. The grab handles built into the side panels were also a very nice touch. Maybe most welcome of all the changes in the chassis for 93 was the addition of a fully removable rear subframe for the first time. This time-saving feature had been on Hondas for a decade at this point, but Yamaha had been reluctant to install one on the YZs. For 1993, shock servicing finally moved into the 80s for Yamaha pilots. Braking, reliability, and component quality were also very good for 93. The bike may have been slow, but it did not blow up every 10 minutes like the very fast but very fragile Kawasaki. Overall, the 1993 Yamaha YZ125 was an excellent motorcycle in need of a major power transplant. It handled well, looked great, and gobbled up the track, but it lacked the power to run at the front. While less peaky than previous offerings, the new look YZ offered up very familiar performance. In the 250 or 500 division, its other virtues probably would have made up for its relative lack of thrust, but in the motor is everything 125 class, it was paramount to a competitive death sentence in 1993. Alright, so there you have it. That's a look back at the Yamaha YZ125 for 1993. A machine that was, about 75% awesome and 25% disappointing. Unfortunately, the 25% was probably the most important part of it, which was the motor. It just didn't have the power to run with the Honda or Suzuki or the Kawasaki. Really, all three of them pretty much had them covered this year. Good bike otherwise, but definitely in need of some serious motor help. If you'd like to support what I do, again, check out my merch on the Motocross Vault Teespring store. I would very much appreciate that. If you could like, subscribe, share on social media, help get the word out on the channel, I would really appreciate that as well. I do read all the comments you guys leave below, and I definitely take that into account when I'm looking at the next machine to do here on the channel. So until we meet again, this is Tony Blazer from Motocross Vault. Keep the rubber side down. Peace.